History is made in Zimbabwe as President Robert Mugabe resigns from office. A new study's shocking conclusion about the link between Nigeria oil spills and infant mortality. And Africa in the spotlight at this year's Dubai Design Week. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCorry. This is Africa 54. First to the unfolding political drama in Zimbabwe. Former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa arrived back in the country on Wednesday, 2 days before he is due to be sworn in as president to replace Robert Mugabe, a ruling party ZANU-PF official confirmed. Now, Speaker of Parliament Jacob Mudenda said the ruling ZANU-PF party has nominated Mnangagwa to fill the vacancy left by Mugabe on Tuesday, and he will be sworn in on Friday. It will mark a new era for the country ruled by Mugabe from independence nearly 4 decades ago until his swift downfall this week. Mugabe sacked Mnangagwa as vice president 2 weeks ago to smooth a path to the succession for his wife, Grace. Mnangagwa fled for his own safety, and the military seized control, shattering Mugabe's authority. Now, the United States responded to Mugabe's departure with a call for free and fair elections. While on the streets of Harare, Zimbabwe's capital, people danced and cheered in celebration. Mariama Diallo has more.
Cheering crowds raced through the streets of Harare as news spread that President Robert Mugabe had resigned after nearly 4 decades in power. The Speaker of Parliament read out what he said was a letter from President Mugabe formally tendering his resignation. While some regarded Mugabe as the leader who fought for Zimbabwe's independence, many others were happy to see the end of his rule.
Zimbabweans, we are happy.
21 November, we're celebrating independence.
His rule, some analysts say, destroyed Zimbabwe.
Taking a country that had a fairly strong economy, some of the best education and health systems in the continent, a very highly educated, skilled professional class. What he did to the economy, to the notion of a popular revolution and an opening of democracy is egregious.
Others noted Mugabe could have avoided this end if only he had left power sooner.
Mugabe, if he had left power in the 1990s, would go down in history in most circles as a beloved icon of African liberation. I think a major exception one has to point out, however, is that even in the early days, he presided over the Gukurahundi massacres, which killed an estimated 20,000 Ndebelés.
A new Zimbabwe has to be inclusive and not under the thumb of the military. That's according to American University professor Kweku Nwama.
If the vice president wants to play a role, he needs to get in line and make his case to the people. If Morgan Changirai wants to play a role, he needs to also compete. If Grace Mugabe wants to play a role, she needs to also compete.
A point underscored by the U.S. as well.
The future of Zimbabwe, though, has to be determined by the people of that country. We look forward to and hope for free and fair elections. What they will do in the meantime is what we hope. We continue to urge unwavering respect for the rule of law.
The spokesperson did not specify whether U.S. policy towards Zimbabwe will change because of the week's events. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
Now, for more perspective on the likely future of Zimbabwe, Dewa Mavinga, Director of Southern Africa Human Rights Watch, joins me live via Skype from Johannesburg. Dewa, things have moved rather fast since we spoke last time. Tell me, what do you make of what has just happened? What is going on today in Harare?
Absolutely fast developments in Harare. Since we last spoke this morning, Emmerson Mnangagwa was in South Africa, where he met with President Zuma before flying back into Harare. And the Speaker of Parliament has announced that Mnangagwa will be sworn in on Friday, November 24, as the next president after Mugabe. And this is in accordance with the nominations that ZANU-PF, the ruling party, has done. So this is where we are now. Mugabe is gone, and Mnangagwa likely to be in office on Friday.
Well, people have been celebrating, but well, Mugabe is out. Mnangagwa is back in, but now at the head of government. What's the difference? ZANU-PF in power still, right?
Absolutely, and it appears ZANU-PF could emerge stronger from this. Mnangagwa and Mugabe, strong and close allies for the last 40 years or so. Mnangagwa having been Mugabe's right-hand man until they fell out recently. They have been together, complicit in all the things that have happened in Mugabe's tattered legacy and checkered history of 37 years of authoritarian rule. So, as I said before, these are cut from the same cloth. And as one ZANU-PF supporter said in jubilation as he celebrated, they said ZANU-PF has simply changed the head of the train, but the train continues moving. It's the same train. So in terms of the infrastructure, if you like, of authoritarianism and violence, it remains intact and has now shifted its loyalty to Mnangagwa. So it remains to be seen really whether Zimbabwe will move in a different political direction than that which we had witnessed under Mugabe. But where I could see some changes is that it is likely that Mnangagwa would move in the direction of a strong authoritarian states that focus on development and the economy without human rights and democracy. States like China, or in Africa, Ethiopia or Rwanda. That's how I see Mnangagwa, moving forward. He might want to ensure development.
But do you get the feeling that the people in those few days might have tasted something, might have like, it's almost like they climbed up to the mountain and saw some possibilities in Zimbabwe? Do you see them putting pressure on the new administration in Harare to respect human rights, but also, of course, to develop the country?
It is, Vincent, a tough road ahead. It's no easy walk to freedom. And what has happened in the last few days has not been that the people themselves climbed up the mountain, but the military hoisted them up to the mountain, made them see, and then now they will be gently put back in their place. It is the doing of the military that has been in the last few days.
If we were to give advice to the guys in ZANU-PF and Harare, what would be the best way forward for the country so that when you look back, you could say this was a pivotal time in the history of that country and it becomes a great nation after that?
What needs to happen is that Mnangagwa and the military being victorious in this moment, and as he is sworn in on Friday as the next president, to finish off Mugabe's term of office. This period going to elections in 2018 should be seen as a transitional period to institute proper reforms so that there could be a restoration of civilian rule through democratic elections. What has happened is not a good precedent, a military intervention in Zimbabwe. So we need to have a restoration of democracy through elections. So Mnangagwa, working with others in a transitional team, he should put together a coalition team for the remainder of Mugabe's term of office that is now finishing, to essentially institute reforms. And among those reforms should be security sector reforms to ensure that the military is not a decisive factor and guarantor of political power in Zimbabwe, but that political power should derive from democratic elections that are free.
We hope for the best, and we hope Mnangagwa will desire a better legacy than that of Robert Mugabe. Dewa, we appreciate your insights very much. That's Dewa Mavinga, who is the director of Southern Africa Human Rights Watch. Now, to East Africa, Somalia's government said on Wednesday it had requested a U.S. airstrike that killed scores of suspected militants to help pave the way for an upcoming ground offensive against the Islamic group Al-Shabaab. The U.S. military's Africa Command, AFRICOM, said on Tuesday it had killed more than 100 of the Al-Qaeda-linked insurgents in the strike on a camp 200 kilometers northwest of the capital, Mogadishu. Somalia Information Minister Abdurrahman Omar Osman told Reuters those militants were preparing explosives and attacks. Back in the U.S., a U.S. federal grand jury has returned a 22-count indictment against Saipov, who is accused of a deadly terrorist attack in New York City. Saipov drove a rental truck onto a bike path, killing 8 people and injuring dozens others last month. He was formally charged Tuesday with 8 counts of murder, 12 counts of attempted murder, providing and attempting to provide material support to the radical Islamic State group, and violence and destruction of motor vehicles resulting in death. Saipov, an Uzbek immigrant, was hospitalized after he was shot by a police officer. Islamic State claimed responsibility for the truck attack, which was the deadliest assault on New York City since the September 11, 2001 attack. Now, babies are much more likely to die in their first few weeks of life if their mothers live close to the site of an oil spill. That is according to new research. Scientists studied data on infant mortality and oil spills in Nigeria's Niger Delta region and described their results as shocking. Henry Ridgewell reports.
It's estimated that 240,000 barrels of crude oil are spilled into the Niger Delta every year. The environmental effects are clear to see. The effect on the people is slowly coming to light. The study by scientists at Switzerland's University of St. Gallen is shocking. Babies born in the Delta are twice as likely to die in the first month of life if their mothers were living close to an oil spill before they became pregnant.
We looked at the birth histories of more than 2,500 Nigerian mothers, and we compared siblings, some conceived before and some conceived after a nearby oil spill.
The researchers compared geo-referenced data on 6,600 recent oil spills with results from the 2013 National Demographic and Health Survey. The results show that even spills that happened 5 years before conception doubled the chances of babies dying after birth. However, spills that happened during pregnancy appear to have little effect.
We think the main reason is that some of the negative health effects are just building up over time. So if you think about these negative health effects, these are due to skin contact with crude oil, or to drinking contaminated water, or eating contaminated fish or crops, and also inhaling smoke from fires.
It's thought unborn and newborn infants are more vulnerable as they haven't built up natural defences. But the researchers say more clinical work is needed to determine how crude oil affects health.
So what is that exact channel? And the second line of research for, I guess, clinical studies would be to think about which part of crude oil, and crude oil is an extremely complex mix of hydrocarbons, which part of that is actually most harmful for both adults as well as newborn children.
The study suggests the effects of oil spills will be felt long into the future. In 2015, the Anglo-Dutch oil giant Shell agreed to share the costs of the cleanup, an operation that the United Nations says will likely take 30 years. Critics say only a fraction of the money has been paid. Shell blames oil thieves for causing many of the spills. The Nigerian government did not respond to requests for comment. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Now, coming up, how will Robert Mugabe's resignation impact Zimbabwe's economy? Stay with us.
This is BizBeat.
The Beetle business is buzzing in Catepec, Mexico City. The Volkswagen Beetle, that is. Pablo Maldonado Santiago is one of many illegal cab drivers using VW Beetles to transport people around a very dangerous area to make a living.
No kidding.
He says cabs refuse to go up the hills because of so many murders and robberies here, so registered taxi drivers fear for their own safety. So the easy-to-maneuver and repair Beetle design fills a need. Ruben Chavaria is a local government spokesman. He says there's a public transportation vacuum that's hard to cover because the area is very steep and hard to access. Ecatepec, known as Vocolandia or Beetle Land because there's some 2,500 illegal beetle taxi drivers cruising some 10 hours a day to make $150 a week. Esteban Torres is a regular rider. He says it's an alternative because the government can't do it. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
Well, Robert Mugabe finally gave up his seat as president of Zimbabwe. How will that impact the economy? With more details is Jill Malandrino, Africa 54's business correspondent, reporting from the NASDAQ market site in New York City.
Robert Mugabe has finally buckled under pressure and resigned as president of Zimbabwe on Tuesday afternoon amid impeachment proceedings against him in parliament. In his 37 years as president, Mugabe has obliterated his country's economy. Recall, Zimbabwe was once called the breadbasket of Africa. Mugabe's woes began in his early years as president when the country was struck by drought and a world recession, resulting in commodity export prices decreasing. To combat this, Mugabe decided to shift economic policies, implementing the Economic Structural Adjustment Program that allowed for an open market economy, but the plan failed. Unbudgeted civil war and unrest further exacerbated the dire situation. By 2006, Zimbabwe's annual inflation rose above 1,000%, and as time progressed, the introduction of new bills flooded the market. This later grew to the point where a $100 trillion banknote was released into circulation. In an economic period of hyperinflation, Zimbabwe was forced to abandon its currency and replace it with the U.S. dollar in 2009, and further had to resolve to issuing bond notes last year in efforts to introduce some form of liquidity into the system. As we reported last week, Zimbabweans have turned to cryptocurrency as an alternative to escape hyperinflation and purchase goods online from international suppliers and traders. Ultimately, Zimbabwe's growth depends on what kind of government results from the current upheaval. Now, much of the hope lies on the return of the vice president to power. Early indications that the military hopes to improve the economic situation and the vice president's apparent support for pro-business reforms are cause for cautious optimism after decades of mismanagement under Mugabe. And that's according to Ryan Turner at the Protection Group International, as he told CNBC Africa. Until then, it will be a challenging environment for foreign direct investment. From the NASDAQ market site in New York, I'm Jill Malandrino, and this is Africa 54 Business News.
Well, Racial inequality in post-war America and civil rights activism are prevalent themes in Hollywood films this season. Using gritty cinematography and A-list actors, directors such as Kathleen Bigelow, George Clooney, and Dan Gilroy shed light on the history of racial injustice in America and open up the conversation about racial tensions in the present. VOA's Penelope Pulo has more.
It's a war zone out there.
The film drama Detroit by Academy Award-winning filmmaker Kathryn Bigelow is based on the 1967 riots that tore apart the city of Detroit.
These riots, this was an anger that was building and was on a collision course in 1967.
Major American cities such as Detroit became the battleground for discontented African Americans facing unemployment and racial discrimination in housing and education. Bigelow focuses on a chain of events one night during the riots that led police to brutalize a group of innocent African Americans.
When I went in there, 3 kids had been killed.
No. So they were killed right before you got there?
Sir.
You carry a .38, right?
Police officers attempt to incriminate an African-American security guard who witnessed the events at the hotel and tried to intervene to defuse the situation. John Boyega plays real-life security guard Melvin Dismukes.
I need you to survive the night. He was an unspoken guardian angel to those boys that were there. Police!
Detroit combines a cinema verite approach with taut drama. Weaving historic footage into dramatic sequences, the film immerses us into the riots as a pivotal moment of systemic racial injustice and repression in America.
My hope is that the film could maybe stimulate greater conversation.
From the inner city, we move to the white American suburbs of the 1950s with George Clooney's dark satire, Suburbicon.
Nothing like this ever happened here. This is a safe place. It was.
Like Bigelow, Clooney uses real-life racial tensions as a counterpoint to his murder mystery, which takes place in the all-white suburb of Levittown, Pennsylvania.
I'm gonna kill you, too.
A corrupt middle executive, played by Matt Damon, is getting away with a murder while the community focuses its attention and indignation against the Myers, the first African-American family to move into Levittown. George Clooney says when they were making the film, President Donald Trump had not yet been elected, and the racial intolerance that surfaced in Charlottesville had not taken place.
It was in the middle of the campaign, and it seemed like it was fun to talk about and remind people that these are not new subjects.
Mr. Ramirez was told he was not under arrest, and yet he was refused use of the bathroom. That's a violation of civil rights.
You can wait and address.
In Roman J. Israel Esquire, filmmaker Dan Gilroy crafts a character drama that targets institutionalized racism through a corrupt judicial system. The story takes place in today's Los Angeles and revolves around Roman, a socially awkward lawyer.
Okay. Finding in contempt.
Played by Denzel Washington, Roman comes face to face with an overburdened justice system which disproportionately affects African Americans. Filmmaker Dan Gilroy says his story, like his character, is reminiscent of the political activism of the 1960s and 70s.
The story spoke to me on a very contemporary level. There are things going on right now, legally, constitutionally, nationally and internationally, that the story just became a focus.
Despite their different methodologies, all three films address racial tensions, but also the potential for racial reconciliation and tolerance. Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54, African furniture and art features at Dubai Design Week. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Africa was in the spotlight at Dubai Design Week. The event provides an opportunity for some of the big and established names in design to rub shoulders with new and upcoming creative minds. African Designs made a mark on the event with the Africa by Design pop-up exhibition. The exhibition celebrates the rich and multidimensional design landscape on the African continent, with designs from Senegal, Ghana, Mali, and Nigeria, among others. Now, the works fall into several categories, including furniture, product design, textile design, and environmental design. Well, next up, here's a different take on Perth's Central Business District in Australia. The swarms of busy workers are in fact honeybees pollinating the veggie gardens atop an inner-city car park. Hobby hives are popping up all over Perth. Even the city's Parliament House has some. It can be expensive to get started, and keepers will need the right equipment to protect themselves from stings. But when you get it right, the rewards can be sweet. And finally, Libyan teenager Yara Al-Sharif has been running a cafe only for 3 months, but La Mer Cafe has already created a buzz in Tripoli. Sharif is among the few in the city to keep up with the worldwide food trend for colored burgers. Now, the dough for the buns is mixed with vegetable extracts to give them a different color and flavor. The idea of serving something different was hers with a little help from social media. Fashionable cafes have been springing up in Libya's capital in what some see as a sign of return to relative normality. And that's what's trending today. Now, in the world of sailing, there are only 3 major events: the America's Cup, the Olympics, and for 45 years, the Volvo Ocean Race has been the toughest test in worldwide sailing events. Every 3 years, teams race around the world, and teams will be arriving in South Africa later this week. VOA's Caroline Turner has more.
The iconic round-the-world race kicked off from the Volvo race headquarters in Alicante, Spain on the 22nd of October. They will be traveling 45,000 nautical miles, stopping in 12 different cities around the world, and end at The Hague in Holland in June of 2018. All 7 teams are racing the same design 65-foot carbon fiber racing machines with state-of-the-art electronics, navigation, and control systems built to withstand the toughest oceans and weather in the world. New in this edition, instead of an all-female team, race organizers allowed mixed teams. Leg 1 to Lisbon was not uneventful. The fleet jostled and fought for the lead right from the start of what will be 83,000 kilometers of racing. Liz Wardley of Turn the Tide on Plastic gives a play-by-play.
It's pretty cool, pretty intense. We're pretty close for like a couple of days now. They're about 400 meters in front of us, standing a little bit higher, and we've got like, I don't know, 12 to 14 knots of breeze, so it's just in the crossover of a couple of sails, and we're on different sails at the moment, and we're doing the same speed and same height.
Other teams had gear failure during the middle of the night, and Sung Hong Kal's Scallywag ran aground in the dropping tide.
We gave ourselves every chance to beat Axo by coming along the shoreline where the breeze was, and then obviously the breeze died out and we got stuck on the bottom, and Parko and Goffey had to swim with the anchor at 90 degrees out to get us off the bank so we didn't hit the rocks, and then pull the sails down and drift in the current across the finish line.
Vestas 11th Hour Racing defended their lead right to the Lisbon finish, taking the Leg 1 victory. Spain's Mapfree continued to battle all the way to the finish for second, as did Dongfeng Race Team, who placed third. After a week of port activities, the teams departed on Leg 2, 7,000 miles from Lisbon to Cape Town, South Africa. Carolyn Turner, VOA News.
Well, and that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings, Today Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. And from all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Most people enjoy listening to music. But is this expression actually about songs and tunes?
Music to my ears.
Jonathan, I cannot believe we have to work over the weekend.
Did you not hear the news? The meeting for the project got canceled. No work this weekend after all.
Awesome! That is music to